Hi, I'm Chris Martens, and I've worked as a senior reviewer both for the Absolute Sound magazine and Hi-Fi Plus, but for this show, I'm representing Next Screen Networks. And with me is Wendell Diller of Magnepan. And the occasion here is that Wendell is using this show as a chance to introduce his new LRS Plus loudspeaker. What is it? What's it meant to do?
My thoughts are I don't view this as so much as a product as a new tool to deal with the problem. We live in the Amazon world now where everything click and ship. Um, Given the the change, the 1970s aren't coming back again. We had stereo stores, multiple stereo stores in small markets. And now, you know, it, the change began to take place in the 1990s as the dealers financially, they had to diversify into custom and home theater. I mean, their love was two-channel, but they had a business to run. As they diversified, the two-channel part of the market became less important. And that was a slow process that I was watching, and so I was worrying about, well, where this is going. When will it ever come back? Well, then the pandemic came along, and I had a lot of guys my age or younger that gave up, retired, hung it up. It's not coming back. So what is the customer in Billings, Montana, that owns an expensive pair of box speakers? He's heard about Magnepans. He reads the Absolute Sound, but he's not going to buy if he's not going to buy the high-end models based on what Jonathan Vallon says or any other reviewer. He's got to hear it.
Yeah.
This LRS is the tool that I envision that, okay, I'm not in sales anymore. I'm just thinking marketing strategy. I love marketing strategy. I'm thinking, all right, you're that customer in Billings, Montana, and I want you to consider the 20.7 or maybe the 30.7 or whatever. So I'll make a deal with you. I'll send you this pair of LRS, and let's get on Zoom, and I'm going to help you set it up. And I'm going to see, so you don't really, I want you to have some skin in the game, but I believe you're a potential customer for a 20.7 or a 3.7. So I've done this with Zoom with the 30.7s in Australia, China, United States. You get on, I look at their room, and I've set up enough magneplaners. I can tell them where I think they should be set up. I watch them react. They give me the feedback in real time. I make suggestions. I can tell whether it's clicking, whether the customer. So I noticed that this hypothetical customer, were really, I see by your body language that vocal, wow, that's better than that. I see the look on your face that, Chris thinks that the mid-range of this little speaker sounds better than his box speaker. Okay, now we can talk. But you because your room is big, you notice, well, it doesn't have the bass like my $15,000 box speakers or whatever. Okay, I got another tool in my toolbox, and that is the key is this flagship this prototype concept that you've heard, that we've shown a few times. Now we have a new avenue that, all right, you want to fix the bass issue with the little LRS? I've got something to work with, and we negotiate. The dealer could be doing this function because he's got a lot of customers that live too far away. He can't get them, entice them to come in and hear his store, or maybe his store he's had to downsize and he really doesn't have that great a sound room. I call this the virtual dealer in-home demo concept.
Okay.
I think it could work, and the whole purpose of the LRS Plus was giving a higher level of resolution that could challenge some very expensive box speakers in certain parts of the range to make it a tool for the new method of marketing.
Okay.
Now, we haven't really got that started, but it's a concept that I believe has potential.
Well, I think one thing that's true, and viewers may be interested in this, is that there have always been entry-level Magnepans, at least as I remember. My memory goes back to the 70s as well. But the trick was the entry-level models were sort of a compromise, because the early ones were designed so that you could use kind of cheap electronics with them. But then when you brought out the original LRS, which stands for Little Ribbon Speaker, that was kind of a watershed moment, because all of a sudden...
No, it was a big gamble.
It was.
There was a lot of risk, because Jim Winey's strategy was to get... he knew that the customer wouldn't have a high-end amplifier, and they were expensive, good Class AB amplifier back in those days. So he needed to design it to run it with... For NAD was a big deal. An NAD receiver with an SMG or SMGA, that was a hot combination. But it's a Volkswagen, and we knew it. So, I mean, the MMG was the beginning, in 1995, was the beginning of our 60-day home trial concept, as we were seeing our dealer network changing, evolving so dramatically. So that was a factory direct or a dealer method of getting people started. So it was successful since 1995, never was changed. Well, we did the MGI, which was some smoothed out some of the lower treble in the tweeter, but the LRS was a big gamble because you needed a serious amplifier, and I was kind of nervous about this. What if we need to have, the customers need to have a modestly priced amplifier available that will drive this load, because it's the same kind of load as our more expensive models. That was the big gamble.
Well, having reviewed the original LRS for Hi-Fi Plus magazine, I mean, one thing I can speak to was that compared to all the entry-level Magnepans before it, the LRS was the one where you would sit down and listen to it, and if you were familiar with the bigger, more expensive Magnepans, you had to kind of stop and go, this is a lot like the bigger models.
Yeah, that's correct.
And so
what about the amplifier problem? Did you put it on some amps that it just didn't cut it?
No, but then again, the amp I have and used with it is one expensive enough. I don't think most people in a million years would buy that amp.
Right.
But although they'd be happy if they did.
Yeah.
But so I take it the idea behind the LRS Plus is to turn things up an even bigger notch from the original LRS to have an entry-level model that's even more like the expensive ones.
No.
No?
And for the entry-level customer, I don't know if they're going to appreciate the difference. If you had moderately priced electronics, I don't know if they would detect the difference between the LRS and the LRS Plus. It was not done for that, because for that intention because we were running, like 5 months back ordered or something. You don't come out with a new model when you can't produce the models you have. Oh, this was all about, in my mind, it was thinking, what are we going to do? How can we reach that high-end customer?
Yeah.
So just give them the resolution, come up with an idea how we can give more resolution and that the customer with high-end electronics could appreciate. That was the whole motivation. It was like we needed a boost. The customary thing is after 5 or 6 years, you come up with a new model. You tweak this or that. Well, we don't do that for one, because if it won't pass a blind test, we don't come out with a new model. That makes it difficult. So it was strictly delivering higher resolution with the intent of reaching that high-end customer. I don't think it's going to make any difference between, for the person that's just getting started.
Unless they have good enough electronics and source components, correct?
Again, if the LRS will do the job, it's done, but it's been amazingly successful at reaching that entry-level customer. So another level of resolution, if
it's kind of gilding the lily a little bit.
I guess so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you could say it that way.
So, what is, well, let's start with the value side of things. What is the price difference between the LRS and the LRS Plus?
We're hit with inflation, so it's a mad scramble. I mean, the prices keep going up. The magnets, the perforated, everything is going up. So you have to put it in real dollars to say how much more is it, how much better sound for in real dollars. Well, I don't know how we do that calculation.
Sure.
But we're still getting slammed with price increases. I mean, this inflation thing is, well,
it's real.
Everyone's kind of nervous about it. Are we going to get this under control?
Yeah. So, well, let me come at this a different way. What is the price of the LRS Plus?
$995.
Okay. So it's not a huge jump up from the LRS. It's a little more expensive, but.
And it may not be, depending on how you figure the inflation, it's not really that much of a price increase.
It may not be any.
I'm worried about, how we've got to get this inflation under control, because we can't just keep eating the price increases. At some point, you've got to pass it on.
Yeah. Now, with the LRS Plus, what are the primary differences between it and the LRS? And I realize you can't go into a lot of the technical ones because.
You remember how Harry Pearson and Jonathan Valen beat me up on the 1.7? It's like, look, I've been through this so many times. It's like Jim Winey's invention is so simple. There's nothing that's that impressive. It's not impressive to me. The incremental increase improvements. There's no diamond crusted or beryllium dome or exotic cabinet.
No special monk sauce.
Yeah. It's not that exciting. It sounds better. Do you really need to know? Well, some of it is, it's a secret sauce. I mean, we're not going to give up all of our secrets, but it's really not that impressive. It just works.
Okay. So visually, the LRS Plus is what, an inch narrower than the original LRS?
Right.
It's the same height.
Yeah.
Has the same bass response.
Yeah.
New stands.
Yeah, that's an option. But there's been a little cottage industry for some time making stands. It's like, yeah, we should do that. So okay, finally, we got a stand.
And how much are the stands?
280, 289, I believe.
Okay, well,
Just
they
go ahead.
look pretty beefy. We'll get some close-ups of them
Yeah.
later on. Okay, so sonically, what can somebody who already knows what the LRS is like expect from the LRS Plus?
Higher resolution, top to bottom.
Okay.
No sales hype. Sorry.
No special weird technologies. Just go listen to it,
Yeah,
see what you think, and
but we're not expecting people to step up from the LRS to LRS Plus. And as I said, for the entry level customer, I don't know I'm dating myself, new improved Tide soap. I don't know, because I never had the old Tide soap. So,
okay, I hear you.
yeah.
What, I mean, here in this setting, we have the prototype of Magnepan's dipolar subwoofer, just so people can
Dipole
kind of.
Woofer, yeah. By the way, we're calling it Ultra Wideband Bass System, UBS. Because I did that demonstration. What I'm doing on the road. By the way, I see this as a pivotal technology for Magnepan because it's I believe it's patentable. But we're looking at that's being investigated. But it is most consumers are not aware of the difference. What is a dipole versus a monopole woofer? Subwoofers are subwoofers. So one of the things that we're doing as Glenn and I are touring North America is letting them, over 50 years we would say, no, you don't want to put a subwoofer with a magneplaner. It doesn't work. Well, technically it doesn't work. Because you're mixing a monopole with a dipole. This is a dipole, so it works in it produces sound waves in the same way that the big panels do. So the demonstration I did for you was let's play it full range. You don't need a woofer doesn't have to produce high frequencies and produce cymbals and violins. Let's do it anyway. The point is that I've seen it so many times in the chat rooms. Oh, you don't want to use the XYZ subwoofer with a magneplaner. It's just too slow. Well, this is ultra wideband response. And so we're doing this unrealistic demonstration to say it can produce cymbals, violins. It can produce. I've inadvertently at the show here, I got fouled up on the demonstration, and I'm playing what I thought was the LRS, and wait a minute, oh my God!
Well,
I'm playing the woofers.
Whoa.
So it's of course it doesn't have the resolution of the LRS in the highs, but it took me a little bit before I realized my mistake.
And we saw that with the gentleman who was listening alongside me earlier, because he walked in the middle of us listening to the woofer, and at one point I leaned over to him and I said, are you ready for this? You're just hearing the Magnepan woofer. The Magnepans aren't even turned on.
Yeah.
And he kind of looked at me like, yeah, you're crazy. They have to be playing. And in fact, he later asked, so that was the woofer with the Magnepans, right? And you're like, no, no Magnepans were harmed in the making of this demo. That's just the woofer. And his eyes grew about the size of silver dollars, and he was like, really? That's just the woofer? And it's like,
no, I find that when I do that demonstration, some people don't intuitively get it, that means if it can reproduce the highs, that means whatever it shares, since it produces the sound waves in the same way the big panel, if it's got that kind of bandwidth, then obviously it can, wherever it's sharing the load in the mid bass, it's going to stay in step.
Yeah.
And that to me, that's intuitive, but not to everyone. So we explain it that way, that it has no problem keeping up.
Well, and it's really true because I find a lot of audiophiles hear the reviewer speak of, oh, this woofer's not that fast.
Yeah.
But they're kind of in a place where like, well, what does a fast woofer even sound like? I don't know what you're talking about.
Right.
And yet, when you hear a slow woofer with a Magnepan, the effect is that, well, now I have bass, but it's not really synced up with the speaker.
Yeah, and there's a number of technical reasons that this is going on. It's not just speed, a transient characteristic. It's also the monopole versus the dipole wave propagation. There's a number of things that goes on. So in this demonstration, you're hearing a woofer / subwoofer that's got imaging. It can reproduce an orchestra. It's got sound stage. You don't need that from a woofer.
But it's nice to have.
If you get down to really nitty gritty, yes, it should propagate the bass in the same way. So wherever it shares the load with the panels, there's no problem integrated. Which, by the way, frees up from a design standpoint. Now what can we make something that will fit in our little townhouse? Because all these years, decades, we love our townhouse. We've got a wood stove. There's no place on one side, the left channel, forget it.
So, Wendell, you've mentioned that this new woofer concept is sort of a fork in the road. What does it imply for future Magnepan models?
Well, I've always felt that the Jim Winey's invention has so much potential, but when you're asking this concept of a ribbon or quasi-ribbon or planar speaker to produce all the frequencies, you got engineering constraints. Namely, you want to sound better, they get bigger. Now they're too big, I can afford them, but I can't use them. So this is a critical, it frees you up into, if you can imagine it, you've got a system, you've got the lower frequencies covered with something that will blend with whatever you want. I mean, hypothetically, you want an on-wall speaker, and you have a shoebox-shaped room. You put the panels on the wall. They're motorized. They come out. Now you've got woofers that, whatever limitation that on-wall model might have, you've got a woofer that, no problem. We can play nicely with each other, and you could have a Magnepan sound in something that you look around the room and you don't see any loudspeakers. I mean, I don't know that I failed to mention that this concept, this really works because of DSP. I mean, a dipole woofer is not a new idea, but with DSP and the power you get with Class D amplifiers, you can position it in many different places you couldn't otherwise put it, and you can fix the time phase amplitude problems with the DSP, so it plays nicely with whatever the panel might be. So it really just opens up a lot more, frees up your design thinking and what type of ribbon speaker you want to produce.
So now you don't necessarily have to have that great big membrane in order to have high quality bass.
Correct.
You can do it with...
That's correct. And it'll blend with whatever design you want to come up with.
Excellent.
Well, I think that's very exciting. And we envision we're going to be going lower priced dipole woofers. This is also a learning process for us because it's a unique approach. And yeah, your existing Magneplaner model, you want better bass, you want good integration, we eventually will have lower priced options. This is the flagship.
It's pretty impressive. Well, in fact, we'll have to do a little more listening here, but
Yes.
It's very impressive. So, one question I wanted to ask for you to phrase in layman's terms is, and I get this question all the time whenever people see the Magnepan 3.7i's that I have in my reference system, and they'll look at the thing, and you go through the routine of, what is that? Well, it's a loudspeaker. Get out of here. No, it's a loudspeaker. Would you like to hear it? And then after they hear it, the very first next question is, how do these things work? So how do Magnepans work?
Well, they work the same way that a conventional loudspeaker works. If you took a conventional, I think the easiest way for somebody to comprehend it, let's take a conventional cone speaker and convert it into a quasi-ribbon magneplaner. So if you take the magnet structure, cut it into thin strips, and put it on a perforated steel plate, which acts as the magnetic pole piece, then you would take the cone and flatten it or turn it into a sheet that is a 1/2 mil thick, very, very thin film, and stretch it over this diced up magnet structure. Now, then you take the voice coil winding and you flatten that wire into a foil and you attach it to this flattened cone, which is now a film, and put it on the film, this foil on the film in a serpentine manner. You've now converted it, a woofer, a dynamic speaker, into a quasi-ribbon. We call it quasi-ribbon because true ribbon only had the foil between the magnets. So anything that deviates where it's on a substrate, where the foil is on a substrate, we call it quasi-ribbon.
Okay, all right.
So it's the same principles.
But it's
executed differently so that as a film, because it's pushed over its entire area, it doesn't have to be stiff. Where a cone has to be stiff because it's pushed from the movement comes from the coil in the middle. So it has to be ideally extremely stiff. So it moves with the coil, but when you make it stiff, then you increase the mass. Well, if you make it into a film and push it over a total area, you can have very low mass because you're pushing it over the entire area. But,
and this is why Magnepan sounds so fast and agile and
the unit area of mass is extremely low if you measure it in terms of square inches. It's got transient characteristics because your mass versus your area is very, very low.
So let me just follow up on something. When you have Magnepans with a highlight lamp shining on them, are the silver strips we see, that's the foil?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Very simple.
Well, although as I recall from a visit to Magnepan where I attempted to build one once, it takes really delicate hands to do it right.
Yes, it's labor intensive. Yes, it's more. Cone speakers dominate the market because they've got obvious advantages.
Yeah, I mean, you can churn off a whole tray full of drivers almost in an automated process. And Magnepans, as you say, they really are hand-built.
Yeah, that's correct. Yep.
I mean, you can automate parts of it, but not the critical stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm thinking this might be a good time to do some more listening. Does that Sound like a plan
sound
to
good.
you?
Yes.
Okay.
I'd like you to hear that, the rest of the guys to hear that Magnepan, that woofer concept, playing wide band, reproducing an orchestra, or the drums are very impressive.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. Let's do
Okay.
it.
Well, thank you so much for your
Okay.
time. I really appreciate
Thanks
it.
a lot. Thank
So
you.
Chris, now that you've had a chance to listen to LRS Plus and the woofers separately in this system, tell us your thoughts. What do you think?
Well, let's start with the woofers first. Now, the woofers aren't a product yet, but they will be. And I'd have to say that's the best darn subwoofer / woofer I've ever heard. And in fact, I think Wendell will find that there are many non-planar speaker models that could really benefit from that woofer. So it's going to be intriguing to see how much it costs, and I'm a little bit afraid to find out, but we shall see, and I predict that's going to be a big hit. LRS Plus. I provide a little background. I reviewed the predecessor model, the LRS, for Hi-Fi Plus magazine, and like many of the journalists who heard it, I thought it was just a staggeringly good deal. And again, what made it special was that it was intended as an intro to Magnepan model, but for the first time, Magnepan kind of pulled out the stops and said, okay, we're going to make this sound a lot like our higher end models, which it did very successfully. The deal is, this just sounds even more like the high-end models for a pretty modest increase in price, especially if you factor in inflation. It's almost like it didn't have a price increase. Now, one thing Wendell told me is that the LRS goes away to be replaced by the LRS Plus. So if you've been somebody sitting on the fence about whether to buy the LRS, buy this instead. So what's actually different? Well, to my ears, the speaker's a little more cohesive in the upper mid-range and actual treble region. And to me, its heightened resolution, which is sort of its calling card, it's the reason it exists, is most apparent right in that upper mid-range treble region. And the thing that I still am puzzling over is how much like Magnepan's real ribbon tweeter they're getting this quasi-ribbon design to sound, because not all Magnepan quasi-ribbons can do that or even come close, but this does. I don't find the bass to be tremendously different at all. I think it's pretty much a wash between the LRS and the LRS Plus. But in that interesting region that I think of as upper bass, where you start to hear the timbre characteristics of drums and bass guitars and so on, that's where you hear the improved resolution and focus again. It's subtle. You know, if you heard the LRS, you wouldn't go, ugh, I can't listen to it anymore, because it's not like that at all. It's more like, oh, this has peeled a few more layers of the onion. So, given how many layers the original LRS peeled already, that's saying a mouthful. So I think these little guys are going to win a lot of friends. And honestly, although I know Wendell's desire is that this be an entryway to even bigger and better Magnepans, I'll tell you honestly, I think for a lot of people, this is going to be all the speaker they ever wanted. And once Wendell reaches a point where he has a dipole woofer that's cost and size appropriate for use with this, I think that's going to wind up being the destination system for a lot of people, including people with really finicky tastes. So if we speak candidly about what can't it do, all the bigger, more expensive Magnepans are taller, and there's a degree of realism that comes with that bigger, taller image. So that's one thing you get when you step up to the big guys. There's a definite limit to how loudly this can play before it sounds, harsh isn't quite the word I'm after, but a little bit ragged, a little bit starting to think about getting raw. So you have to live with it within the volume range it likes. And the bass is so clever on this thing because it's really hearty right down to the point where it stops making bass altogether. And, I know recordings that would just show you in a split second what it can't do, but I also know, and we heard some of them, recordings that make you think, that's all the bass I need. I'm all set. I don't need my subwoofer, schmubwoofer. I don't need that. So I think it's a lily gilded, and the gilding is worthwhile. So I would encourage anybody who ever thought about buying the LRS but didn't to jump right on this train before the back order line gets nasty looking, because I think for $995 you're going to be really, really hard pressed to top this or even to equal it.